camera. And yeah, don't be shy. We just like to interact a little bit. So I am going to give it over to Laura, and she can tell us a little bit more about herself too.
Okay, hi. I'm Laura, and I live just outside of Kansas City, in Kansas. And I work with Zen Yarn Garden doing a variety of things. Right now, mostly I knit a lot of their samples. So a lot of the shawl samples and kits that they've been doing, I've been knitting those samples. Back in the before times, I used to sometimes appear in their booth at shows. So I've been working with them for a while now, and I joke that when I teach, I'm not generally allowed to teach actual knitting because I am left-handed and I knit backwards. So my presentations are usually a little bit more theoretical. And I've actually prepared a slide presentation today, which Roxanne will share in the chat as a PDF. So you do not need to take notes because you'll get this. This is kind of tips and tricks and different kinds of charts. And can everyone see my screen? Am I good?
You're good.
Okay, great. So as they said, this is the 12th Tutorial Tuesday, and we're going to talk about reading charts today. So let's start with, what are charts? Charts are a visual representation of your knitting. What they do is they can eliminate long rows of written instructions, and they give you sort of an easy way to see what your knitting should look like. But they can kind of look like hieroglyphics. So we're going to go over a little bit about charts today and how you would read them. Generally, charts for knitting are organized in a grid format where each box is a stitch. So they're organized in rows, so you can see the numbers on the, well, in this case, on both the left and right-hand side. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you can see those numbers going up vertically that are indicating the rows. You can also see the numbers that indicate the columns. Sometimes in charts, they won't number the columns, but you can see that they are numbered here, and each box across each row corresponds to a single stitch. So like I said, the basic elements are rows, columns, and the key, which is located to the right of the chart here. And that is kind of a little legend, like in a map. It's going to tell you what stitches you are going to be knitting in a chart that you're working on. So in all of the charts that I have pulled today, I have put information on where the charts come from. They're all free patterns on Knitty, which is an online magazine. And since they are available for free and online, that's why I pulled these particular charts. In general, I don't pull charts out of patterns otherwise because they're sort of giving away information. So let me, hold on. Okay, so the first thing to know about working charts is whether you're working back and forth or in the round. Sorry, skipped forward one too many. So on this first chart, when you're working flat, when you're looking at the rows, right side rows are usually the odd rows, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc., unless they are otherwise specified. Occasionally a chart will start with an odd numbered row on the wrong side, but it would be specified. So generally your right side rows are the odd rows, and you are going to work them from right to left. And that is because you work your stitches on your needle from right to left. A quick note, somebody told me when I very first started knitting that all charts were worked from right to left. And so I learned to work charts from right to left. And every time I worked a chart, if it wasn't symmetrical, my chart would be backwards. And that's because I knit my stitches from left to right. As I mentioned, I knit backwards. So that's just kind of a little tidbit story, but all charts are worked from right to left. And even today, I have to stop myself sometimes from knitting them right to left. However, if they're symmetrical, it usually doesn't make a difference. So your right side rows are worked right to left, and your wrong side rows are usually the even rows, and those are worked left to right, which sort of corresponds how you, when you're working your knitting, you're still working them from right to left, but if you are looking at the right side of your fabric, you're actually working them from left to right. So your rows are going back and forth, back and forth. One hint that you can get in determining whether your chart is meant to be knit flat or in the round is a lot of times they will put the corresponding row numbers on the side where you're supposed to start knitting. So in this case, the 1s are on the right because you're going to knit from right to left, and 2 and the even numbers are on the left side because those rows you're going to knit left to right. Like I said, the exceptions are sometimes they will tell you that they're doing something different. So you do have to kind of read the notes that come with charts, but these are true 99% of the time. So if you're working in the round, remember you're never turning your work. So you are always working in the same manner. And so all those rows are worked on the right side and they are read right to left. So for instance, this is from a hat chart and you're going to be knitting it in the round. So you're going to work round 1 all the way around the hat, and then you're going to work round 2 all the way around the hat, and you're going to continue to go from right to left. So what if the chart only shows odd rows? Occasionally you'll come across a small chart where they have removed the even rows entirely. Usually what this means is that there is some kind of standard pattern for the even rows. Often this means you're just knitting or you're always purling. So for instance, when you're knitting a lace shawl, you may just see the rows that have patterning on them, and on the way back, you may just be purling all the way back. That will be noted in your written directions, and it usually will be noted on the page where the chart is. So don't be surprised if you see that even rows are missing. It does happen sometimes that way. So the real question is, where do you start working? Charts are actually read from the bottom up to the top. And that's because much like in your knitting, you are actually stacking your rows of stitches on top of each other. And even if technically you're, say, knitting a sweater from the top down, you are still knitting the first row first and the second row on top of it and the third row on top of that. So in every chart you'll see, you're going to start in the bottom right-hand corner and you're going to work your way up. So this is 24 rows in the main body of the hat pattern, and you would start at 1 and work all the way through 24. So, and we'll talk a little bit about the crown piece next to it in just a minute. So the next question is, or the next portion is interpreting what it is that you're supposed to knit. Every chart that you get should come with a key or legend, much like in a map, that will tell you what the symbols mean, and that means what stitch to work. Now, some of those are going to be abbreviations. They may not always tell you exactly what it is. For instance, down at the bottom, you can see in the key there's an LT, which stands for left twist, and an RT, which stands for right twist. You may need to refer back to the abbreviation section in the pattern to figure out exactly what those stitches are and how they are worked. But in the chart, you'll see the symbol appear there, and that will tell you what you're supposed to work next. Some boxes may be worked one way on the right side and another way on the wrong side. So for instance, if you're knitting in garter stitch, usually a plain empty white box with nothing in it is going to be a knit on the right side, and on the wrong side, it's going to be a purl. And of course, you may come, because that means that I'm sorry, that's for stockinette stitch. So if you're knitting garter stitch, you would be knitting on the right side and knitting on the wrong side as well, but you are looking at a chart as though you're only looking at the right side of the fabric. So you'd be knitting one row, and then the next row would technically look like a line of purls, but on the wrong side, you'd be knitting it. I know it sounds a little complicated, but it's based on what it would look like from the front. The first row would look like tiny little V's, and then above it, you would have a row of purl bumps. There also may be some stitches that take up more than one box. So for instance, the left twist that I talked about in there, the left twist is actually a 1x1 cable, and one stitch is going to cross over another. It's going to result in a 2-box stitch, or you're going to be working 2 stitches at once, and that symbol will appear over 2 boxes. Or if it's a 3x3 cable, it will appear over 6 boxes. So you will see examples. I can go back to, oops, that's the wrong way. I can go back to the cable chart here, and you can see that when you put the cables next to each other here, it's 4 stitches wide. So 2 stitches and 2 stitches. Okay, do we have questions so far? And where are we on time-wise? I don't want to. Okay, I'll do one more and then we can maybe break. So we've interpreted the symbols. Let's talk about increasing and decreasing stitch counts. So increasing and decreasing stitch counts may be indicated by the shaping of the chart. That is, this is a lace shawl, and you can see that it is growing outwards, And in some cases you're adding, you can see with the yarn overs and the boxes, you're adding 1 extra stitch on each side of the row. And in some cases you're knitting 2 and 3 stitches on each side of the row. I know this one looks complicated, but I'm just using it to indicate shape. If we go back to, this chart, what you're seeing here is the top of the crown, and you're seeing corresponding decreases because the top of your hat is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as you're working. So you can tell if the chart is not like a rectangle, you can tell that there's some movement in the chart. You're either decreasing or you're increasing as things are getting bigger. The other thing that I wanted to show here is sometimes in places where ultimately you will increase, they will block out boxes in either a black or a very dark gray. And in those cases, a lot of those mean you can see in the legend down at the bottom that those black boxes are where no stitch is used. So that means that you're eventually going to increase in some way such that there will be another stitch there, but there isn't currently a stitch there. So you just skip that particular set of boxes like it's not even there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do the midpoint, or do you want me to keep going?
Take a break?
Sure.
All right. Break. Yeah, that's a lot of information.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot.
Yeah, I guess I'm at this break. We're doing a brief interlude to show you a kit that we have available, and that is the Moody Shawl. And it is charted. It's a pretty simple chart, which I think Laura's going to get to a little later on like some color working things. So this is Mosaic knitting with a chart to show you that. So she's going to talk about in the second half. And we do have our discount code. So there's 20% off the whole site. That includes everything, knit-alongs and everything. And that the code is chart. So I think we do have one knit-along going on now that Anik is leading, and that one, you probably could still join that one and just watch the recording of the first one and then join us for the next one. So that one has been fun. Are you working on it, Anik? Do you want to hold it on?
I am actually working on my Rainbow Warrior.
It's a fun one. It's neat.
And I actually did the sample for that one.
Did you do that one? Yeah.
The Rainbow Warrior sample?
Yeah, she did the sample that I was holding.
Oh, and Debbie's here and knitting her Rainbow Warrior too.
Yay! Awesome.
And Ellen. Ellen's saying it's over there. It's over there.
Perfect.
Awesome. So awesome. So we will get right back because I know Alora has just like so much information for us here.
But there's not too much more.
Yeah, and don't forget that the links for the Moody Shawl are in the chat. My chat is on that side of my screen, so I'm kind of pointing there. Moody chat, Moody Shawl in the chat. Chart is the code that you use at checkout for 20% off, and that is good for all the knit-alongs, all the grab bags.
Oh yes, grab bags.
Everyone knows how much we love the grab bags.
I may have to do some shopping when this is over.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and I didn't mention too, you want to tell them about the yarn? Or I will, but it's this is DK weight. So this one is Serenity DK. It's just 2 skeins, one of each color. So you do want contrasting colors for this one. But I've also knitted up in the Superfine DK, and this is one of the color options available too. It is a shawl, but it has the loop, so it makes it nice and easy to wear. But I'll just put it on quick. Anyway, yeah. So take a look at those specials that we have. And I did see a question in the chat go by. So yeah.
So Laura, if you could explain the knit on, or the K on the right side and the purl on the back again.
Okay, sure.
Seems it was a little nebulous.
Yeah. Okay. Some charts are, let me share my screen again so that you can see it, and I will actually go back to that one as well. So actually this forget what's on here and just look at the key for a moment. Sometimes symbols will have one meaning on the right side and one meaning on the wrong side, meaning you're going to work them one way on the right side and separately on the wrong side. So for instance, on row 1, these white boxes would be worked as knit stitches. In row 2, when you're working back and you want these stitches to appear as the white boxes to appear as knit stitches, you actually would purl them, because remember, the chart is depicting what you're going to see on the right side of your fabric as opposed to the wrong side. So sometimes you're actually going to be switching between stitches when you're working front and back. And the two where that is most notable is usually knit and purl. Sometimes there are other symbols that change meanings, but mostly you're going to see where you're going to knit. A knit on the right side would be a purl on the wrong side, and a purl on the right side would be a knit on the wrong side. And you'll see that, like, this pattern here has garter stitch edging. So the edges of your piece, this is actually a top. So the edges right at the end of where you're working your pattern repeats are going to have garter edging. So you're going to be, technically in this case, you're going to be knitting every row because you're working back and forth. But if you were working in the round, you would knit these the first 4 stitches, and then on the next round you would purl them. Does that make sense? I know it's a little hard. This is definitely a little bit conceptual. That's also why I put together the deck and why I'm going to give it to you to take, because you can keep a copy of it and kind of refer to it when you're using charts if it isn't immediately kind of second nature.
And it is currently in the chat if you want to go download it, because as soon as we close tonight, well, the chat disappears. Get it while it's hot.
But I do have it as a PDF, so if we need it later, I can always send it again. Okay, so let's talk about repeats. One of the really nice things about charts is they make looking at repeats really easy. We've all seen those written direction rows where repeats are indicated in brackets or parentheses or with a star and then repeat from star. That's kind of what the chart is attempting to show us here.
And who hasn't missed the asterisk?
Yes. So the way to read a chart is the repeat will be indicated in red, almost always in red, occasionally in another color, but red is pretty, I should say, charting conventions are fairly standard. Most of the time, the symbols will be fairly standard. You'll have a blank box for a knit, a dot for a purl, you know, your slashes either way for your knit 2 together and your SSKs, the O for a yarn over. A lot of them will look fairly intuitive. Every so often, somebody decides to use a different symbol for something. So that's why it's important to always look at your key. I will say there are quite a few charting pieces of charting software, and there are a couple industry standards that make everything look pretty much the same. So all of these rules are, you know, there's the little asterisk for the exception, the occasional exception, but in general, this is how things are going to look. So repeats are mostly indicated in red outlines. Remember that if you print your charts out in black and white to save on your color ink, you might actually want to print your chart page in color, because sometimes there are colored things that will be important, and we'll see that in the next couple things, in the next couple slides. So the way that you would read a chart like this is you would work stitches 1 through 7 first, and then you would work stitches 8 through 17 in repeat as many times as you need to get to the other side of to get to almost the end of your knitting. And then you would work the last 4 stitches 18 through 21. So for instance, if you're knitting a shawl that's quite wide, maybe you're going to knit the first 7 stitches, then you're going to knit 8 through 17 10 times, and then you're going to knit 18 through 21 later. For your last 4 stitches of what you're knitting across. Now, the nice thing about this is that the chart stays pretty compact, even if you're going to be knitting multiple repeats of this chart. So for instance, on your next, you're going to knit rows 1 through 24, working bottom to top, but maybe you're going to repeat knitting this chart again after that. So then you're basically going to be working rows 25 through 48, and you're still going to keep the same pattern. You're just going to have more repeats per row. So it's kind of an economic way of showing you what it is you're knitting. Okay. So let me grab the next. So charts can also be used for color work. think about reading instructions and have somebody having to say knit stitch 1 in white, knit stitch 2 in gray, knit stitch 3 in white, knit stitch 4 in gray. That's a lot of words. And while I do know some designers who write their patterns out that way, working particularly in color work is really made much easier by charts. And in your key, you're going to have colored boxes that are going to tell you which colors, and that's going to correspond to the colors you're working with in your pattern. And then you're just going to have your regular stitches. So these are from Go Big or Go Gnome. They are mittens. So what you can see is you've got these great little gnomes and lots of little color work. You're never working more than 2 colors per row, which makes it much easier than it appears at first. And then up at the top, you can see the chart changes to show the decreasing for the tip of the mitten. And then in the very middle section up towards the top, what you're looking there is the thumb gusset. So that's where you're going to increase your stitches for your thumb gusset, which is going to be in your mitten. So sometimes charts are just a really great visual way to see what you're supposed to be knitting without actually writing it out in words, because this makes much more sense written like this than it would written with all the colors. Charts can also be super useful in mosaic and slip stitch knitting. This is from Hope Point from Knitty, which is a top. And actually the interesting thing is it's a top that has 2 halves, and each side, one of the colors is dominant. So as you can see in chart A, blue is more dominant, and in chart B, white is more dominant. But when you're knitting mosaic knitting, which is slip stitch knitting, you are working 1 color at a time per row, and then you are working the other stitches, you're usually slipping them. So you can see, for instance, in the top chart, row 1, you're slipping all the blue stitches, which means you're working in white. And you can see sort of how the pattern is also going to line up, what mosaic pattern your slip stitches are going to make, because you can see the different colors in the chart. So for instance, on row 1, you would knit with the white color and you would slip stitches 2, 6, 7, 9, 10, and so on. The other thing is, here's one of those naturally occurring charts where they're not showing you the even rows. In this case, that is because you are knitting each row twice. So it's just going to create 2 rows of pattern. So you're going to continue to knit you're going to continue to work with the color you're working with, and work the stitches that you're working and slip the stitches that you're not working, if that makes sense. I don't want to say knit the knits and purl the purls, because that may or may not be what you're doing. Mosaic can be a little complicated, but charts actually can sort of lay the picture out for you. So here's kind of some of my top tips for working with charts. If you like working with charts digitally, meaning you want to just see them on your iPad or on your phone or whatnot, I can recommend Knit Companion. It is a free app that you can use to sort of track some of your charts. I believe they also have a subscription for some extra features. But basically you can import your charts into there, and what it has is it has row counters. You can highlight the row you're working with. You can make notes on your chart. It is really a nice sort of digital chart management. If you prefer working with charts on paper, then there are lots of things you can do. Generally, you can print them out. Remember what I said about printing them out in color so that you can see the different, you can see where your repeats are. There are magnetic pattern boards. This happens to be one from Knit Picks, but you can get them at all the major craft stores. It's just a magnetic board, and they give you a whole bunch of magnets that you slap on there to hold your pattern to the board. And then you can use a longer magnet if you have one. And oftentimes they come with the board to kind of mark your rows as you're working up your chart. There's also highlighter tape, which is sticky enough. It's a little bit like masking tape, so that you can stick it and unstick it, and you can move it up your row so that you can easily highlight the row you're working. You can use any kind of row counter, and in a pinch, Post-its work. The other thing that I have done is I have actually just laid a second piece of paper, like a second piece of printer paper, on top, and just moved it up as I work up my rows in the charts, but that can kind of help you keep your place. So charts can be really complicated looking, and they can be really scary, but they're still fairly easy to knit because a lot of them have the same properties. You're going to start at the bottom and work your way up. You're going to be working in the direction of your knitting. The key is going to tell you exactly which stitches to work. And then charts make certain types of knitting, like color work, much easier because you can actually see what the pattern is going to look like rather than just reading it and having to kind of figure out a picture in your brain. The other thing that I will say is charts can make lace work easier because they can show you how the patterns fit together such that you can see that, oh, this row of yarn overs is going to stack. And so when you look at your knitting, if you're learning to read your knitting and you're looking at your chart, you can find out pretty quickly if you made the yarn over one too soon or one too late because it's not going to match up with that line. So left to right, I've just included, these are the projects that I pulled charts from on Knitty. They're all these patterns are available for free. And that's pretty much what I have today. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this helped a little bit and didn't confuse too much. The more you work with charts, the more practice you'll get at working with them. So does anybody have any questions? I'm going to stop my screen share at this point so you can see me. I will look at the chat and see if there are any questions. Doesn't look like.
I think you've got to most of them.
Software. I use Stitch Mastery. There is another, and I can't remember what it's called, but as a tech editor and a designer, I use a product called Stitch Mastery. It is about £100. It's a UK company. It's about £100. They do release updates every so often, but it is a pretty standard charting software that magazines use, pattern houses use. Basically, you create the chart. It's got its own proprietary format, but once you create the chart, you can export it as a PDF or a variety of other things. So then you can drop it right into your pattern files.
There's also a free knitting symbols like font that you can get for Word.
Well, I should say some people do create charts in Excel. You can set your columns and your rows so that they are equal width and height. So that it looks like a grid format. And yes, you can use the charting symbols in there and you can create your own charts in Excel. The nice thing about Stitch Mastery is you tell it kind of how wide you want it to be. You tell it how many stitches wide. You tell it how tall you want it to be. You can basically use the icon and put the correct symbols in the correct boxes. You can outline the section you want to repeat, and then it will also automatically translate it to written directions. So, which you do have to double check to make sure that they come out looking correct. But there's a lot that it can do if you want to work as a designer. The red repeat section for the shawls. If in your written directions, you are reading something that says, okay, knit 4 at the beginning, and then you're gonna knit 1, purl 2, SK2P, blah, 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 blah. And it's gonna either be in parentheses, indicating you're gonna knit that same sequence over multiple times, or maybe it starts with an asterisk or a star and you read through the directions and then there's a semicolon and it says repeat from star 7 more times. Those repeats in a chart are going to be encapsulated in the red box. So, and it's almost always going to be a red outline.
We have a question from Barbara. She has her hand up.
Oh, I missed that.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Can I ask it verbally?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I mean, I asked before that I've seen the patterns where they begin with gray squares, then they do the pattern repeat, and then they end with gray squares. I still don't understand how you can begin a piece of knitting with gray squares. I mean,
so basically what that usually means is that there aren't any stitches at the bottom. What you'd probably see that in is some kind of a chart that's going to grow. Think about it in like the shawl chart that I showed. So it means.
Okay. So you actually go over to that narrow part.
Exactly. You
start there.
Exactly.
Okay, now it makes sense.
And,
Okay,
and what it means is you're going to be increasing stitches as you go. So your piece is going to get wider and wider. And eventually those stitches will be there. And so they want to show those columns for the
Okay,
entirety of the chart.
I thought somehow you're supposed to start at the very right. And I couldn't get this at all.
Right.
But now it makes sense. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey.
We like to see
Okay.
those light bulb moments.
Yeah.
Okay, last chance. The next tutorial Tuesday is going to be Intro to Lace with Anik, and I will be manning the behind the scenes next
It's
week.
actually a great segue from intro to charts,
Yeah.
Yep.
because a lot of lace is charts. Woohoo!
So do remember that you can save 20% site-wide. I believe this is for the
Yes.
next 48 hours. So it will
Yes.
expire on Thursday. Use the discount code CHART at checkout. You can join the current knit along, which is the Rainbow Warrior Shawl, which Anik is leading. You can also use it to get yarn for the Moody pattern, which Suzanne Nielsen showed partway through. Or you can just buy grab bags or just buy any yarn you want. Go crazy.
Grab
And-
bags, grab a grab bag.
So thank you for joining us this week, and we will see you next week. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Laura.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.